Our New Testament reading today comes from John, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. Listen now and see if you hear a word from the Lord. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that of you and me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to." Now standing there were 6 stone jars, water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. And when the steward tasted the water that had become wine, and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Man, everybody serves the good wine first, but you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed into him. This is the word of the Lord. I actually once attended a wedding that ran out of wine, and vodka, and tequila, and bourbon, and whiskey, and whatever else was being served at the bar, and it was by far the most fun wedding I have ever been to. When the bar closed that night, I assumed that the bartender was cutting us off, but the bride and groom, who were my good friends Tanya and Pavel, later told me that they'd actually run out of alcohol. Tanya and Pavel, who are good friends of mine from Princeton, had planned for every guest at their wedding to drink 8 drinks. They ran out of alcohol less than 2 hours in. At that point, their parents and their parents' friends, all of whom were either from the Ukraine or Poland, started bringing out handle after handle of premium vodka, but eventually that ran out too. Luckily, shortly after the alcohol ran out, an ice cream truck appeared. It truly was a great party. I think of Tanya and Pavel's wedding every time I read this story. The story of the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine, is beloved by almost all Christians. Catholics love it because it features a speaking part for Mary, and they love Mary. And many Protestants, especially Presbyterians and Lutherans, love it because it gives us something to say in response to Baptists who tell us that we can't drink wine. Of course we can drink. Jesus turned water into wine. The book of John is often divided into 3 sections. The first, which includes the opening of John, is called the prologues, and that's the section that starts at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was. This section, which goes from John 1:1 through John 1:8, sort of gives an overview of what the whole story of John is going to be about. The second section of John, which goes from 1:19 to the end of chapter 12, is often called the Book of Signs. In the Book of Signs, in that section of John, John describes the 7 miracles or signs performed by Jesus which reveal who Jesus is. As John tells us in this book, these signs cause people to believe in him and reveal Jesus' glory. Today's story, which is the story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding of Cana, is the first of those signs in the Book of Signs. The story of the wedding at Cana is pretty straightforward, and my guess is it's one that many of you know well. Jesus' mom, Mary, is at a wedding. Jesus and the disciples are invited. We don't know why. Maybe they're friends, maybe they're acquaintances, maybe they got an invite because of Mary. And eventually the wine runs out. Jesus' mom, Mary, asks Jesus to do something about it, and he gets an attitude and has a tone with her, saying, "Woman, why is that our problem? My time hasn't come." But Jesus must have at some point agreed to make this his problem, because he does, in fact, end up helping the servants turn water into wine. And this was not some cheap boxed wine that you get at a gas station. It was really good wine. It was good enough that when the sommelier tasted it, he is blown away by how good it is. When I think about that interaction between Jesus and Mary, I wonder if there was more to the story between what was said between Jesus and his mom. He obviously had an attitude with her when he said, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me?" Calling your mom woman in that way would have been no more acceptable then than it would be now. And I think the moms in the room can probably imagine that she wasn't super pleased. I wonder, did she say, "Well, Jesus, let me tell you why it's our concern"? Or I wonder if she just had that mom look that said it all. I think that the question Jesus asks of his mom is an important one. "Woman, what concern is that of you and me?" What does it tell us about who Jesus was and what his ministry was about that he made it his problem? And what does it mean for us? He didn't have to make this his problem. While I think that Jesus could have been a little more polite in the way he spoke to his mother, his question was good. Why is it their problem? Shouldn't they mind their own business? What good comes of being a busybody and of trying to fix other people's problems? Sometimes you need to stay in your own lane. This wasn't really their problem, so as Jesus asks, why would they make it theirs? In order to answer that question, we first have to understand what the problem really was. While the problem of running out of wine at the wedding reception is obvious, the subtext might not be so obvious for us. Maybe the bride and groom's families couldn't afford enough wine for the reception. Or maybe too many extra guests showed up and crashed the party. Or maybe it was like Tanya and Pavel's wedding and all of the guests were obviously heavy drinkers. Whatever the cause, running out of wine at a wedding in Jesus' time would have been a big deal, a very, very big deal. In a culture where hospitality is valued above almost everything else, running out of food or wine would not have been seen as a minor inconvenience. It would have been seen as inhospitable. It would have been considered rude or tacky. It would have brought a ton of shame on the bride and groom's family. I was trying to think of a modern equivalent and I couldn't come up with one in our culture, but maybe you can help me think of one later. But it would be really, really bad. It would be super embarrassing. This was not an issue of poor planning. This was an issue of poor hospitality. Mary obviously knew what a problem this would be. While I could be wrong, I don't think Mary was concerned that the kids wouldn't have enough fun if they ran out of wine. I think that Mary was concerned the family would be embarrassed. Whether she said it with words not recorded, or whether she said it with her mom look, Mary knew that this was their concern because these were their friends, or at the very least, their acquaintances, and you don't want your friends or even your acquaintances to be embarrassed. It was their problem because you don't want people you love to suffer. And if they were embarrassed, they would have suffered, and Mary knew they could do something about it. In the book of John, Jesus' first sign, this first revelation of glory, the first thing that makes his disciples believe into him is not a healing. It's not a sermon. It's not a resurrection. It doesn't meet any real bodily or spiritual need. The people at this wedding are not going to die of thirst. Turning water into wine here won't save them from dehydration. They are not going to be harmed by a lack of wine. No, Jesus' first sign is simply an act of frivolous hospitality. It's a small act that saves a friend from embarrassment and ensures that people can keep having a good time. For the bride and groom and their families, the miracle is not that water was turned into wine. We don't even know that they know what was happening. The miracle for them is that they've been saved from the embarrassment of running out of wine. Woman, what concern is this to you and me? Woman, why should we make this our problem? The answer seems to be when it helps people save face, when it brings people together, when it ensures people have a good time, when it spares people from needless embarrassment or suffering. That is when we should make other people's problems our problems. So what can we take away from this text that we all know well? It's probably more than just it's okay to drink every once in a while because Jesus turned water into wine. I think that it's instructive for us that for John, the purpose of these signs is to reveal who Jesus was, and it is instructive that the first revelation comes through hospitality. Jesus' ministry for John starts with the wedding at Cana. It starts with Jesus supporting a couple in a culturally appropriate way and ensuring that all of the guests at the wedding are met with hospitality, that there's enough good wine to go around, that everyone can have a good time. Perhaps this is a reminder of how our own ministries could or should look. Many of us want to show the light of Christ to others around us. We want to preach the gospel and share the good news. We want to grow the church and the Christian faith. We want to show signs of Christ's love and glory to our neighbors, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of being a Christian. But maybe we sometimes go about it in the wrong way. Often, as Christians, we start by telling people about the miracles of Jesus, or by giving sermons, or do-better talks, or praying for healings, and we think that that's where we should start. But maybe that's the wrong approach. Maybe what this text is suggesting is that we should start with wine, or simple hospitality. Maybe the first step in revealing Christ's glory to the world around us is to meet people where they are. This bride and groom didn't need a do-better talk about planning for a bigger wedding. Their guests didn't need a sermon about drinking less. And nobody needed the embarrassment of a shortage of wine. There was going to be no good to come from any of that. What they needed was more wine. They needed enough wine to keep the party going, to keep the bride and the groom and their families from being embarrassed, and to make sure that people still felt welcome. They just needed some wine. When we are faced with a problem that isn't our own, we might be tempted, like Jesus, to ask, what concern is this of mine? Why should I get involved? And often, this is an important question to ask. We do not need to get involved in everyone's problems. We especially do not need to get involved in problems that aren't ours to fix, or that we have no business trying to fix, or that we have no skill set that would be helpful to fix. But sometimes we can, and we should, especially when it's culturally appropriate, especially when it's something that we know how to do, like Jesus knew how to turn water into wine, and especially when it shows hospitality to our neighbors. The first miracle for this bridegroom was that Jesus turned water into wine and saved him from embarrassment. The second miracle for this bridegroom was that Jesus didn't out them. He didn't give him a do-better talk or go brag about how he had saved the day. He didn't go tell everyone how ill-prepared the bride and groom had been. He didn't tell the steward where the good wine had come from. He did his work, and he went on. Sometimes when our friends or our family members or our neighbors face tragedy or hardship, sickness, whatever it is, many of us wonder how we can help, how we can show up, how we can share the light of Christ with our neighbors who are in need. Maybe the answer is simpler than we think. Bring wine, shovel the sidewalk, make a casserole, pick up groceries, do something that you know how to do that makes life a little better. Be like Christ. We can start with hospitality and then don't talk. People don't need a sermon. They don't need some crummy explanation of why terrible things happen. They don't need a sermon about how they could have or should have planned better or done things differently. They need tea and a warm blanket and a casserole. They need hospitality, and then they need us to be quiet. Often, the glory of God is revealed in small, unexpected ways, in small, unexpected acts of hospitality, in small, unexpected gestures that save our friends from embarrassment or offer comfort without a lesson. Sometimes the answer really is just more wine or more groceries or more help shoveling the sidewalks and nothing else. As we go out this week, let us look for ways to help reveal Christ's light in this world. Let us look for ways to offer hospitality or a helping hand. Let us find places where our skills and our neighbors' needs line up. And then let us let Christ do the rest. Amen.